Wonderful class.
Hey guys, I'm just gonna hit the buttons on my computer here. Happy Friday. Welcome to our color theory class. And I call it color theory, but really we're just gonna play with seed beads. So win, right? But I do have a PDF for you guys, which it's a whole lot of stuff put together. Kind of as an intro, when I design with seed beads for jewelry, truth be told, my absolute favorite thing to do is lay out the tubes, line them all up, and start making combinations that I just like the look of. And I never really put any words to what I was doing or really tried to figure out why I like one more than another, and particularly if I look at other artists' work. And as I was telling Felicia when we were first logged in today, like what really inspired me to do this class was a discussion I had with another artist. And she used some terms that I didn't understand to describe the type of combinations she had created. She called them color harmonies, and she described them as, split complementary, or as a tetradic quad, like rectangle quad. And I'm like, what does that mean? And so I looked into all that, and then I went back and took another look at work I've done in the past, palettes that have done really well, and figured out what to call them. And so that's what this is. This is kind of like a put together of all of that. It's a little bit about what are the terminologies and what do they mean, just to get everybody caught up, because I didn't know what these things were. So I thought I would put a little bit together about that. And that's what's in here. And then I have talked about seed beads, because seed beads are a medium that is basically, it's what you're looking at is a subtractive color. So it's a color that is going to look different based on whether or not it is, opaque versus transparent versus silver line. So we have an extra little dimension to think about when it comes to working with seed beads than say like a painter would, right? Painter would just mix the colors. We're doing different stuff. And then on top of that, I have some recipes for you. So these are things that I figured out when I figured out what it was all called. And when I figured out what it was, kind of what I was doing, I looked at everything and then found patterns. I found, wow, I do that a lot. I do monochromatic with a split a lot. I do trios like that, split complementary trios all the time. And I hadn't realized that was what I was doing. So now I have both the name and an example to share, and kind of like a recipe too. All right, so just to kind of dive in the handout, it's I wasn't going to read through the whole thing, but just in general, there's some terms that really stand out that are kind of important. And so the first one is hue. And so this is a term you hear used interchangeably a lot with color or tone or tint, but really what it is, it's describing those main colors that you get when you put that white light through a prism and it divides into all of the broken down colors that can't be divided further. And this goes way back to Newton in like the 1670s. So this is some old science here, but it has yet to be disproven. And at the moment, they believe these colors cannot be broken down any further into, at least to what we can detect, right? This is the visible wavelength of light. So this is what we call white light. And at daylight, full daylight, 100% saturation is what you would see in daylight. And brightness, luminosity is another term. So there's basically three things you got to think about when you're evaluating what color something is. There's the hue. So that's where it is on the prism. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Well, and then there's the value. And the value is, you can think of it as like, what time of day is it? For value, it really helps to look on the color wheel and figure out, if you're a painter and you wanted to lower the value from 100% to 0, you would start adding black to your paint. And that's just making it closer to night, right? If you wanted to increase the saturation, which means add white, that's another term. So saturation is going to give you gray and eventually white. So that's moving inward. So brightness. So for example, like this ring right here is 100% saturation and 100% brightness. So that's the daylight value of a fully saturated color. If you start moving this way, you're desaturating that color. You're adding white and you're getting gray. Some people call it chroma, like in there's a color convention where they call it chroma, but it really, it's turning things more gray. If you start adding black or turning down the light, you're heading out and you are lowering its value. So value is brightness. And saturation is adding white. So that's just making it get more and more pastel-y. So on a color wheel, if you find you're a person who's drawn to earth tones, you like colors that have less brightness. If you're somebody who likes pastels, you prefer colors that are desaturated. Desaturated colors tend to be more calming and associated with spring and summer. And then your darker colors can tend to be more like fall and winter and darkness. And so that's where the moods of color might come from. Some of us perceive when we look at different colors. So those are the main things. And then you'll hear people use some other terms that I didn't know of right away that make total sense when you think about it. But subtractive color is kind of what you're seeing on surfaces, right? So it's when that light hits a surface and reflects back at your eye. Depending on the molecular structure of that surface, it's absorbing some of the light waves and reflecting others. The ones that it reflects are the ones you see and perceive as that color, and that's called subtractive color. When you take paint and you mix it all up, and eventually if you put all those colors together, you get black. That's subtractive color mixing. So that's what's happening when painters are painting, and to some extent, that's what's happening when we're making a seed bead palette. The opposite end of that is if you were doing on a digital screen or a projector and you're taking just the light waves. So we're not reflecting the light waves. We're just taking those light waves, putting them together, and your eyes perceiving them separate versus together. That's additive color mixing. So eventually you're going to get white. All of those lights going to come together and you'll get white from that. So those things are just kind of put that in your back pocket when you're thinking about what it means for you when you're choosing colors and what you're actually seeing. And it's just kind of interesting too. A lot of the science behind this, I dug into it in a lot more than I could include, but it's really interesting. It ranges from physics to biology. There's so much going on here, and some psychology too, if you think about it. But everything from the way we perceive light at the photoreceptor at the back of your eye to the way your neurons process that data, which becomes cultural, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on when it comes to colors. And thus the need to standardize it. So if you want to make color part of your industry, or if it's important to your business, or for example, if you're somebody who designs for companies, or you create a product that has to be standardized for color, you need a color system or a color model to describe. And it has to be something where if you use that term, everyone understands what you mean. So that's why we have all of these color models and color systems that people have come up with. But the last thing I have on this page that I just wanted to touch on, just in case I forgot, I wrote it all down here. There are primary colors, right? And everyone knows those, the red, yellow, blue. The secondary colors are the ones in between those, right? If you combine those just one for one, what you get in between. Tertiaries are the ones you get when you start mixing varying levels of them, right? So secondary colors together with a primary, for example, red, orange, yellow, orange, those are your tertiary colors. So that's kind of what makes up a color wheel, in addition to the saturation and the brightness. Okay. And so a little bit about them. I didn't go into the detail. There are a lot of color models out there. The ones that really make sense to me to mention were the ones that are used for print. This is interesting. It's the cyan, magenta, yellow, and K stands for black, but it kind of means toner, right? So this is like what your printer's doing, and digital, graphic designers really, really need to know about that stuff. That's kind of their bread and butter to work with that. Red, green, blue. That one's kind of another interesting one. You see it in print media. Red, yellow, blue is the one that is typically going to be what you'd see on a standard color wheel because of the way it can divide up, right? And it just makes the most sense to people. So without getting too into that, if it interests you, definitely do a deep dive. There's a bunch of really great books out there that I went ahead and picked up when I was doing some research, and they just make sure you have a lot of extra time because they're they're so interesting. Like an hour will go by and you're still reading. So yeah. All right. So that brings us to color harmonies. We've talked about the wheel. We've talked about some of the terms, and harmonies. What those are combinations of color. And here's where I didn't realize I was doing these things naturally, and they actually have a name, and they actually have kind of some interesting, possible meaning. So one of the cool things I found on my deep dive, and if you want to look into it more, it's a pretty fascinating area. But comparisons have been made to 12-tone musical scales and the 12-hue subtractive pigment color models, which are the color models typically used on a color wheel, 12 parts, right? It's interesting how, like, if you heard a chord played, maybe you don't like the music, but you recognize that that's a chord and that chord is harmonious. There may be something going on with the wavelength of color that has that same feeling to your eye. You perceive it as sight versus sound, but there might be something related there that we intuitively sense. And then that could be why we feel like yellow and purple are complementary colors, right? So anyway, that's something to think about. So the terms, the things that I hear in palette design, I hear people talk about a complementary color a lot. A complementary color just means it's across from you on the wheel. That was way more basic than I was expecting. I thought it was going to be a much more drawn out explanation, but it's literally like purple to yellow, red to kind of a green, or like a magenta to more of a like yellow green. That's your complementary. And the more granular you make this wheel, the more detail you get in that. And this is a really basic representation of complementary, but keep in mind that among colors, all of these hues that you're seeing, this is like a fully saturated and with regular daylight luminosity value representation of the color, but colors have all of these in between values, right? So you could take this color and compare it with this color or that color. They would still be complementary, but you've got a very different result, right? You've got a desaturated color with a fully saturated color that's a little bit on the lower in brightness, lower in value. Still complementary, but a different mix than if you just went with that, right? So people think about that when they design palettes a lot. Split complementary is, and we'll get into like the emotion of like why people find these appealing and less appealing. Split complementary is a little more calming because this is going to get your attention. You're going to see these two colors and they're going to pop from each other and you're going to be like, and it's going to stop you from scrolling. You're going to look. This one's a little different. This one's going to be calmer on the eyes because it's taking that complementary color and splitting it into the two adjacent hues. And so that's what people are referring to a split complementary. They're referring to a trio where you take a color and then the adjacent colors to its complementary color. Analogous, and this is one when you're doing like an ombre or a flow, those are colors that are next to each other in hue. And then here's where it really gets interesting. This is an example of a square, and the tech term for that is the tetratic, but it just is four corners of a square or rectangle. So for example, here's a square, but if you made that a rectangle, you could take these two oranges and put them with those two blues, right? And you get something kind of cool. And all of these, they just spin that and picture what you get. And you'll be surprised the number of times that you grab tubes off a wall and those are the ones you grabbed. And you don't know why you did that. Like I find that happens to me. So now I can see it kind of visually in a way that makes sense. And so I didn't mention monochromatic yet, but we already kind of talked about what a monochrome is. A monochrome is basically it's adding white or adding black to a color, and you're staying in the same hue. So pick a hue, any hue, pick a slice of this pie, and I'll do the bigger version here. It's easier to see. And if you wanted to make a monochrome of, say, like a red, you would desaturate some of them and lower the brightness on others, and you would get an ombre of just red, so a monochrome. And that when you hear ombre, ombre can mean two things. It can mean a monochrome or it can mean an analogous, right? And sometimes within an analogous, you will have different values of saturation and brightness that will actually change that to be kind of a hybrid of an analogous monochromatic. And that's a really fun thing to play with. And I find myself doing that too. So that's super fun. And that brings us to like how colors might make you feel. And this is super subjective. I read a lot of different things and I found a lot of different information, and not all of it was, some of it was mutually exclusive and some of it kind of meant the same thing, but was a little bit different interpretation. But the things that seemed the same, like most people agreed on, were that most of the combinations of color that calm people tend to occur in nature. And in nature, you tend to get these recurrences of analogous and monochromes. So when you look at a leaf is going to have several different greens, analogous greens, and it's going to have varying saturation and brightness. So you're going to get some brown, and that's just basically lowering the brightness on your green. And this is actually a good point that I forgot to mention up here in monochromes, that any color can be gray and any color can be black or sorry, brown. But I found out that gray is not actually a color. So my favorite color is not a real color, guys. Kind of broke my heart. It was like when I found out Pluto wasn't real. But this is, or not a planet. It's real, but it's not a planet. This is kind of what is interesting to me, is that you can put these two things together and get a really cool result. And now I kind of have a name for what I was already kind of doing. And that is, I prefer the brown versions of colors. So I prefer lower brightness on my colors. I'm always going for those earth tones. As I was saying, any color can be brown, just take its brightness down. And if you're somebody who likes pastels, you're preferring that desaturated middle color. But combining these can be also very striking too. So it's just an interesting thought. But in general, back to the emotion of it, people like things that kind of resemble what they're used to seeing, because patterns are calming for people. In everyday life, looking at our world as a pattern. And if this matches a pattern, it's going to appeal to that part of your parasympathetic nervous system that says, I know what that is. I know what that is. I know what that is. And I can just move on, versus I have to process that. Kind of raises your attention level. So if you want to get attention, if you're like, hey, I want people to stop scrolling and look at this design. If you're a graphic designer who's printing a poster, you want people to look at that poster, you're going to use split complementaries and complementaries, right? You're going to make that bold. And so that just means you're taking those colors, you're bringing that opposite color in, and you're putting them together. And people are going to look at that because it doesn't occur in nature. It's not calming, it's alerting. And it's a really fantastic way to make your work stand out, I think. I do love these combos. These are really fun, especially when you do them in their saturated colors. And I'll show you guys a couple examples of where you can play with that too, and how you can calm them down too. One way to calm down a very bold complementary split is to desaturate your color or lower the brightness, or a little of both. You can do both. And if you do that, you kind of calm down that combination. So it helps. I think it helps. And then last but not least, let's see, anything I missed here? No, it looks like I covered it. I mean, there's a lot more I could say about color combinations, and there's literally like 900-page books on the subject. No joke. So if this interests you and you want to dig into it, pick an author, any author. There's tons of them out there, and you go to town. People have been trying to analyze color since we invented writing. It's that old. There's so much out there that you can go look at the history of it. Beautiful stuff. So this brings us to like the meat of the class. This is what I really wanted to show. Okay, so seed beads, we don't have the luxury of mixing them up and getting the color we want like a painter. But what we do have is the ability to get somebody's eye to follow a pattern, and we can take advantage of different finishes and different types of, like, for example, transparent versus opaque. We can take advantage of Picasso finishes versus like a regular opaque to do things like simulate changes in brightness and changes in saturation for the same color. And so in addition to being able to do the obvious things, which is to lay out a really pretty analogous, which is what I did here, an analogous palette. In addition to being able to do that, we can raise and we can lower the brightness. And I found a good example of that. So here's my let's call this my daylight orange here. And if I wanted to turn the brightness down, so lower the value of it, here's one that's a little darker. And it just has, one's a regular one and one has like a Duracoat finish. And that Duracoat finish tends to darken the color. So different finishes can do different things. And another great example of that, here's a saturation and a brightness example. I would say that our daylight color, 100% saturation, 100% brightness, is going to be this one. Here's turning down the brightness. And then here's doing desaturation. And what I did here is I took the same color and I just changed the coating. And then I changed this is a silver lined, and this is a transparent with a luster. Same color. They're all salmon, but you can make them look different. And Picasso coatings are the best way to take a color and make it less bright. So it'll be like the same color, but it has that Picasso coating, and that you're lowering the brightness. You're moving it this way, right? And then when you're adding silver lined, transparent, milky, luster, matte frosted, you're desaturating. So you're moving this way. So that's a great way to stretch your stash, because let's say you didn't have the color you needed and you were trying to make that work. For example, you can take like a desaturated red and use that for your orange, or you could take a yellow that has a lower brightness value and you can make that your orange, and the eye will follow it. If you put it in one of these layouts, your eye will look at that and say, okay. And I do have an example of that in our 8.0s from the Michaels wall. So I don't know if you guys noticed, there's no orange in the 8.0 plan. So I've actually done it in designs. Like we did a chakra design once, and I didn't have that orange and I needed it. So I used the color lined red. Let me show you that really quick. That's right here. So here's our 8.0 red. And then I'm going to go to my yellow. I don't have my orange, but I do have these others. So here's my red, need my orange. I've got my yellow, got green, and it's starting to move into blue. Then we move into our purple. And this one's an outlier because it's actually a darker hue, but typically your transparent is going to bring you lower in saturation. So I would put it this way. But you get the idea. And so where's my orange? I need an orange, right? Well, what you could do, you could bring those in. You could either mix them up and use them together, or you could just go with one of them. You could also bring in a Picasso. This is actually a Picasso chalk, but it's so dark that you could get that to become the orange. So if you just laid that out, your eye might say, okay, might accept that as orange in the case where you needed it to. I actually would mix up all three. I would take all three of these, mix them up to become my orange, and make that work. And we did that on those little chakra mandalas that we did, the wall art. You'll see that combination. And no one ever really noticed it. It just kind of stood out. All right. And so that's pretty much all the things I wanted to explain as far as like coatings and how that affects saturation and brightness. But I didn't talk about metallics yet. So metallics, I feel like metallics are kind of an outlier. They, depending on their hue, can either desaturate because of the way they reflect, or they can darken, meaning lower the brightness. They can do that depending on what they're next to and depending on what their color is. And I've got examples of that here to show, but some of the ones that come to mind are like, for example, these two here. This is a metallic blue, and this is like an iris brown. And I will have to take the lids off these because it was super, super reflecty. But see that color, it's not coming across for you guys, but what I'm seeing here to my eye in this light is all the reflection off of the AB coating. It's like a bronze blue reflection. It's really pretty. That is going to lower the saturation to my eye if I put that in a mix. So just something to think about, even though it's a super dark color. So that's an example of a metallic desaturating itself. But then you've got ones like this, and I have another example, ones like this. they're definitely going to lower. They're going to seem at least to be a darker hue. So it really depends on what you do with them and what next to, right? So play with your metallics because you will get cool results based on what you do. They're kind of like a little wild card in your Uno deck, right? So the top 3 that I do over and over and over again. Didn't realize I was doing this, but it's what I do. I'm loving this idea. And this is when I found the most options, like for examples. I'm always doing a split color. So sorry, not a split. It's a complementary color, right? A complementary, but one of those complementary colors I do a monochrome. And I have a couple variations of this where I've done both a complementary, right, with monochrome, and then I throw in an analogous, right? And that still kind of works. And it really adds a lot of visual interest, but let's bring out the example I have of something like this. And the example I have is lower in the brightness, meaning it's more earth tony, but you still be able to see it. So I took a yellow. Let's take off the cap on that. And then I took its complementary color, which is purple, but this purple is low, is desaturated, and this is also a desaturated yellow. So these guys are kind of they're a little low, closer to the center of the wheel here. So my purple's more around here, and my yellow's more around there. And depending on what wheel you're using, you might see different direct crosses, but usually you get yellow and purple across from each other. And then you want to take one of those and turn it into a monochromatic. So here's those colors again. And I chose my purple. I did a monochrome purple. And so that will be my brightest, most desaturated color. Here I'm adding saturation, adding more. And then last but not least, a dark, this was a very dark amethyst. So that ended up being my palette. And it's prettier in person. I'm looking at my monitor and I'm just not seeing the color the way that I see it in my hand. But you can kind of get the idea of how that could make a really cool palette. And because it's so muted, it's not overpowering, right? So that's a complementary, which is very bold. Complementaries are bold, but because I went all desaturated, and in the case of the brightness on this guy, turned that down, that calmed it down. So it's not as jarring. All right, and so that's that one. Get those lids back on there. I'm going to have a big old mess. And if you want to see these mixed up, it can be really fun to do a pour. And I was going to also share for anyone who does mixes, like if you make your own little kits or if you sell, here it is all together, how it looks like in a mix. And I called this Bumblebee, Lavender Bumblebee. But if you wanted to stir these all up, we could do that and it'd be really fun. It might be funner on a brighter version. See what's happening there. But that part is really fun. Okay, so now let's do a split complementary. So that's 3, right? So let's go back over here. And let's do one like this. So here's a split complementary with these colors. And then I did a desaturation of one of them, just for some visual interest. And then because we're seed beaters, we've got it, I threw in that brown metallic with it. And it looked really cool. It looked really neat. And again, this brown metallic is much more vivid in person than it is on the camera here, but that palette ended up being really neat. And I have that one here too, all mixed up. So this looks really cool. So there is an example of one of these with a little extra, right? Okay, let's go back and pop the lids back on these. Let's find another sample. Okay, I've got a few of the analogous examples. So flows that just kind of go together. And I wanted to talk about the numbers. So some of my seed bead mixes have more or less than 5, but a great number of them, for whatever reason, all have 5 colors. And I wasn't sure why, but then I took a look. So this is half of the color wheel. Got a purple going all the way down to a green. And I discovered that altogether, unless I was doing like a, you know, a rainbow or a chakra, it doesn't feel like it's not scroll shopping. But if I was to take 4 or maybe just 5 of them, so for example, let's take the green out and let's just do this palette. It looks super cool, especially if we take out the purple. And what we have is a yellow, orange, red, and a burgundy. So we're starting to get from burgundy heading into purple, right? So I did some primaries and then I did some secondaries. See my burgundy being a mix of purple and red, right? So it's just kind of doing that. Or what if we drop the purple and the burgundy and we bring in our green? That's a cool palette. Even if I add in that one kind of changes its value for me. That one makes it more bright, right? So I feel like that is more gonna work. So your intuition has a lot of value no matter what, but it can give you a jumping off point. That's kind of the thing, is if you're working from this as a way to, like, I don't know where to start. I'm looking at a whole box of seed bead tubes and I'm so lost. I don't know where to start. This can give you a jumping off point. But we're all limited with what we have on hand. Like, I didn't have exactly the colors I wanted to do these examples. So I just did a little stash dive and I came up with stuff that I thought would kind of work. But you know, I'm using what's actually a luminous neon next to a much lower brightness value Duracoat. So it kind of, you still see it, but I got away with a lot there, right? I didn't need it to be exactly the same for it to still work and be beautiful. So that's something to think about if you have, you're trying to use your stash, you're trying to use what you have. So don't be afraid to try it. And so here's one more example I want to share. Monochrome plus a metallic. I do that a lot. I'll get a monochrome going and then I'll throw a pop of metal in it. So here's an example of that. Here's a nice earthy brown monochrome. So what is this one here? What we've got going on here is a pink that I lowered the brightness on, brought it up to brown, and then I lowered the saturation and brought it down to almost white. So here's my going down in saturation and going down in brightness. And there's my monochrome of a kind of pinky peach. Like we were saying earlier, all colors can be brown and all colors can be gray or white. And in this case, I've got it going from gray to beige. And that gray definitely has a peachy tint to it, an ivory tint. Here's our metal. So let's dump the metal out. I thought the pop of gold was really cool with that combo. And it just kind of, I'm gonna bring it up here. That palette would be very cool. You could block it, color block it, or you could mix it all up and it would look neat in both cases. And I did another version of that. I wanted to show you the gold in this version, but I did another version of that where I used a galvanized muscat metallic instead of my gold. And I did change up some of the intermediaries here. And I got a little darker version, but it still has that same beige. And instead of this brown, I just kind of lightened up and used a little higher level, a lower brightness of this one. I went down like that. Plus I added kind of a dark brown metallic instead of a gold. Totally different look, only changed a couple of the seed beads. So this is how you stretch your stash. You know, this looks like a totally different palette than this, right? I'm gonna pick this one up and then I'm gonna show you 2 more favorites that I've got handy. I don't want to go too crazy on examples because I figured we'd play. I'm going to show you a weird one. Okay, so this is where after I wrote all this up and I was like, oh, I want to show examples, and I went stash diving through, not just through my jewelry, but through mixes. And I thought, I'll put names to stuff I've already done. And when I did that, I found they didn't one-for-one work. Here's one that didn't work exactly, but I think I can explain it. This one is called Storm. And I made it with all blues mostly, and then I put a pop of like almost turquoisey green in there. And let me get the lids off of this guy. This is a periwinkle. It's an opaque. This is the metallic. It's a dark Duracoat metallic there. It's almost navy, but it's got a little less navy and more cobalt going on. It could be cobalt or navy, right? This is like a rainbowy finished matte denim blue. And here's another metallic. This one is a true indigo. They're really deep. Deep navy there. And sorry, not a metallic, that's a Duracoat. And then this one here is a transparent, like seafoamy green / teal / could be a lot of things, right? So you could call it a monochrome, but it's not really a monochrome because this, you could argue that this one's a little over in hue, right? But you could say these are monochromes, but then that metallic is really throwing off my saturation. So I don't know, like I couldn't decide, does it go here? Does it go there? I didn't know. So is it a monochrome? Yeah. Is it an analogous? Yeah. It's both. And then it's got the wild card of having that metallic in it. You could even do that. So that one was pleasing to my eye. That one mixed up looks amazingly cool. A really beautiful fringe color palette. You just don't even have to do anything. You just randomly stitch it by stringing and you get the coolest look. So try that. Try taking your colors that look similar and don't worry too much if they're a different hue or what, you know, what their brightness or saturation are. Just see what happens because you'll still get something pretty cool and you can kind of call it a monochrome, but then with one kind of outlier or two. So that's the weird one. And I was sketching out what they were here. I was trying to say, you can see where I changed my mind like 4 times, what to call it. And okay, last but not least, this is one that's near and dear to my heart. I love this one. Okay, so this is Seattle Mermaid. I wanted clouds and I wanted seafoam greens and turquoises and blues. And I wanted it to be cool. Not just in cool color, but cool in. Just like being style, the style is different. So here's my metallic. And here's what you could call a monochrome. But then this is so much greener than that one. It's a little bit in the analogous too. But it's mostly a monochrome, especially if you just look at that. I thought that was just the coolest palette. So definitely when you throw in that metallic, it does something for you. It just like, it levels it up. And that's all the ready to go made examples that I thought in advance about. But with the rest of our time, what we could do is we could just play with what we've got. We could either use 8.0 or 11.0. I've got all of the Michaels 11.0s, all of the Michaels 8.0s out. And so I thought I would just check in. I got 0 questions during that.
Danielle,
Yeah.
I did not want to interrupt you while you were going through the presentation. Let me just stop you right now and let you know on the sidebar, many kudos for all the work that you did in preparing the PDF. It's most appreciated.
Thank you.
The one, Sue asked a really good question that it would be, you know, time permitting now is how do you deal with opaques and translucents when you're working on a pattern or you're working in a pattern? How do you handle that? Or do you go out of your way to avoid it? Or what do you do?
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah. So, and in fact, that's one that I forgot to mention here in this last little part. I kind of went into a little bit about which types of bead palettes and mixes are great for what type of stitch you're doing or what type of pattern. And she mentioned patterns. Patterns are a tough one because you need that pop of detail. You need high contrast. So that's, you know, saturation, right? We want that both saturation and brightness to be very vivid from each other. So you want to get those as close to 100% as you can, AKA an opaque, for them to really stand out from each other. Because anytime you take it down to a transparent, you are desaturating that color and making it less visible. So unless it's sitting next to a very different color, especially a great example of this is I did a pattern once that had little stars in it. It was a blue sky, it had little ladybugs, sorry, dragonflies flying over a little pond. And in the background was a moon with little stars. all of the stars completely disappeared in my pattern because I used a like a transparent kind of lined white color. I think I used a color lined white, or maybe it was just a transparent white with a silver line. Not remembering exactly, but I can show you kind of an example. Here we go. So next to my blue, this didn't stand out, but this would have. This disappeared and this one would have stood out. And it all just has to do with, in seed bead speak, what we've done with this white is we've desaturated, even though white technically is not an actual color, but we've desaturated it, right? We've taken down the value of it as well. So it definitely, I don't know how to explain. It definitely helps if you use a complementary color if you want it to work in a pattern. So, and then as close to an opaque as you can get, but you can get away with using a transparent if it's really, really different. Like for example, here's a transparent pink, and let's put it next to this green. Yeah, we're probably going to see that, right? That's going to work out okay, even if we just did 1 for 1. But where you really get in trouble is when your pattern has just one bead next to another bead that's, you're just not getting a block. Now in a block, you can get away with a lot more. In a block, you can, because you're seeing a very large chunk of it. And this is kind of a pitfall that I get into when I'm designing patterns, is I will take my seed bead tubes out and I'll lay them all out in a row and I'll think, oh, great. These two colors are different enough from each other. Like, here's a really great example. These two colors are different enough from each other in these tubes that I feel like they could work. But if I put those next to each other in a pattern that has maybe 1Z, 2Z next to each other, nobody will be able to tell them apart. And those in this case are both transparent with some luster coating, but yeah, I'm not saying don't use your transparents. It's just use them with a little bit of extra evaluation, because they could disappear on you, like my stars did in my dragonfly bracelet.
Danielle, that was unbelievably helpful, because now I understand why when you made the tiles in the tile class, one of your flowers disappeared.
Yep.
And I didn't understand the context till right now.
Yeah, actually, that was part of my inspiration for this class. Was I got into that and I was just dumping out everything I had, and I realized that there were certain things that were working and certain things that weren't. So it kind of helped. Yeah.
Perfect.
Great question.
Danielle, the other question I got right really early in the class was your earrings.
Oh yeah. So this one is a Ukrainian pattern that I bought, and then I made it with check beads. And it's a good example of a split complementary. You've got yellow and you've got pink, and then you've got purple. But what I've got going on here is different values and different saturations of those colors. So there's 2 yellows in there. You don't really see it here, but there's a yellow that has the brightness turned down and a yellow that has the saturation turned up next to each other. There's 2 pinks, pink and a desaturated pink. And then there's that nice little transition of purple. And even though that's not flowing, like it's not an analogous flow, because otherwise you would swap the order of those 2, it still works, right? That's another thing that I wanted to remember to mention. That's why I wore these, was you don't have to go in order. So if you create one of these and you put it inside of like a color block or a mix, you don't have to worry if, like, purple doesn't have to immediately flow into red, immediately flow into orange. It doesn't have to go like that. You can mix the order of these up and it will still look really neat, like what was done here. Yeah.
Thanks, Danielle. The other question I had for this class, because I know we've got a class coming up where mixes are going to come into play.
Yeah.
You were going to walk through your plan for that.
Yeah, and I thought, I wasn't sure if we'd get to it today, but we could even create another mix and I'll use it for my class sample for next week. We could do that right now with just the colors we've got in my 8-0 bucket here. I brought this is all of the this is all of the 8-0s at Michael's, with the exception of the mixes. I pulled the mixes out. And so next week, last week we did the herringbone, right, and the color blocking, and then next week we're doing, and this is the same palette. So that was just, the last little part of what I wanted to add was that simply by using them differently, you can make the same exact beads look completely different. maybe add a few things like what I did on this one is I added, because I wanted this to be an earth tone feeling because it's an ocean bracelet, I added some sprinkled black in it. So I took black seed beads and I used them just like pepper, and I just kind of sprinkled pepper in there so you can see it, even though there's no black in this, but your eye is drawn to it, right? It's kind of stands out. And then there's metallic silver line going on there, some metallic silver and a silver line gold. There's barley, 3 different whites, including a crystal clear. And so we have the, you know, in seed beads and in like paints and stuff, we have the bonus of white, black, and gray all being real colors that we can create. But in the case of light, you don't get that. And that's a whole nother class. I almost included, I actually went down the rabbit hole of starting it, but photography, you can't really talk about palettes without getting lost in a photography discussion. It happened to me when I was reading because I realized a lot of things about how I edit my photos that I was doing when I was doing the write-up for this class. There's so much going on there that I now understand a little better. And so of course that needs to be a class, right? Because it's cool. If you make a beautiful palette and you want to share it with the world, you got it ready to go, and you need to be able to take a good photo of it that really represents those colors properly. And then another thing that I just didn't think we could fit in the hour, but that is a very, very cool idea to think about is there are artists out there who have mastered, I mean, they've literally mastered the art of making color part of their brand. And so even though they're not even using the same colors, you look at their photo and you know it's them and you know it's their art. And it's a bunch of things going on. I think it has to do with their filters and what they're doing with brightness and saturation becomes part of the feeling of their piece. They're manipulating color in the same way that we're using to do our mixes, but they're doing it part of their brand. And they're doing it with consistency that people recognize. And so that the way they've done that, I feel like there's a whole science there that's worth looking into that we could talk about. This is really cool. And some of us naturally do it. Like some of us naturally are drawn to certain palettes and we use them a lot. And then people see it and they're like, oh yeah, that's them. That's them. Or, you know, certain setups of like palette blocking, color blocking, things like that. So
Danielle,
yeah.
a few of us online are saying, we know your art a mile away.
Oh, thank you guys. That's
Definitely.
really cool. Yeah,
And
it's something that I've worked on, so it's nice to hear. It's really nice to hear.
Danielle, what is that mix name again, please?
This one?
Yeah.
I haven't named it yet. I was playing with names like Seascape. I think I maybe called it Seascape last week or something. I don't know. I meant it to look like oceans with the sand next to it because you've got the turquoise and you got all the browns and golds. And then the foam is the white. So it's like washing up on the beach.
So Danielle, for the next class, are you recommending a bigger palette or a bigger collection of beads to do the project?
Oh, well, I think for the class, bring anything you want or anything you have. But if you want to do something special, like we could make a mix now that is very bright and bold. It's easy to see over Zoom. And then we could use that for our class next week because I do have to stitch this one ahead. It's got some things that I'll want to show you guys, like when you get to making the button, I'll have half done so we can finish the other half, you know, the usual thing. But this
Danielle,
one will be hard to see.
Yeah, I think all of us would love to see you make a color palette on the fly.
Yeah, let's do it. And I promise I didn't pre-plan it. I'm just going to dump beads out. So I've got all these. I'm going to kind of try to lay them out in order of how they might look. It's subjective though. You know, it's like, does this color go before that? I don't know. We can just play with it. So I think I decided that the color lined red was my orange. And then I went to this one, but I popped in that gold first. And then maybe put that barley in there. Really what this would be is like, if this was on a wheel, it would be like this. Right? That would be our flow. That one would be up there. This one would be down there, right? This doesn't fit on my window, but anyway, but we'll just line them up. And then I'll pop that in there. And let's go to red, orange, yellow, green is next. Green. Here's our blue. Okay, here's our, I can't decide if that's that. Yeah, that's purple. There is a pink here. We can kind of I don't know, we could put it there. It throws it off a little bit, but, and then here's all of our whites. And I've got black here too. Okay, and I brought up this one, the apricot mix, in case we want to pull in any copper or like dark brown, but just in case we need it. So let's look at these. Okay, so what we could do, I don't think we can do any of the really like monochromes unless we could monochrome these guys. We could monochrome these. We could do a monochrome analogous with these right here. So that would be good. We could do same thing with these 3, 4 here. But really what we've got here is an analogous that can just flow this way. Any little combo we want to make. If we want to desaturate it, we can sprinkle some white in it. And if we want to lower the brightness, we can sprinkle in some black or some brown. So I brought this one. And then silver, like I said, metallics. It's going to be an outlier. It's going to look different depending on what we put it next to. But for the most part, I just kind of put it in with the whites because usually it lowers the saturation. So we could do a monochrome with a metallic, but our only metallics is really silver. But we could still do it. Maybe if we did a cool monochrome with silver, we could do a monochrome with a complementary, or we could go over here and we could try to be really brave and do a split complementary and then see what we could maybe throw in some analogous colors with it, or a monochrome one of the splits. We could do that. Something bright for summer. So yeah, if we want it to be bright, bold, stand out, be uplifting, we should definitely do one of these. Right? We should do a split, or we should do a complementary. So let's see. Let's take the red and we will put it across with one of these maybe.
Danielle, I'm chuckling to myself because we're going to force you to make a palette that is not brown.
Okay, because it's got to be bright, right?
It's got to be bright.
Like we got to use the yellow then, right? So let's have yellow be one of ours. Okay. Do we want to do with a blue and maybe a more, let's see what happens if we do blue. And I do have one more blue, but it's a mix. If we wanted to be really primary, we could bring in like that. Or we could, again, so this is lowering the saturation and lowering the value, lowering the brightness right here. And then here's our daylight blue, let's call it that. So we could do that with one of these, or we could do this with those 3, and that would be kind of like a, I don't know, it would be a complementary with a monochrome. It'd be like that. We could do that, or we could do, let's see, if we didn't do yellow, I'm just really jonesing for a bright orange, guys. I really want a bright orange. What if we just went to purple? Let's go to purple. And we could do purple across from the yellow. That would work too. So I'm doing, you see, I'm going into secondaries, right?
That's a big yes from Janelda.
Yeah. And so what we're doing here, just in case, we're using, so there's our primaries, there's our secondaries, and these are our tertiaries on this third wheel, right? So what I'm doing here is I've got my yellows and I'm selecting any of those to get up to oppose it. So yeah, let's go with the purple. And then we could, so now we have a split, or sorry, not a split. I keep wanting to call this a split. A split has 3. That throws me off. This is a complementary right here, but we could monochrome one of those. Or we could monochrome, yeah, so we could do like that. And then we could do that. I don't know. Not sure I like it. I kind of like it, but what if we went more analogous and came down from this color and went into No. Maybe. Oh, I just landed on something there. Thoughts on that? We can pour them out. If we get something where we're feeling confident, we'll pour it out. Or we could move. Oh, we could move up from purple into red. We could do it in a less dramatic way, or we could get really dramatic and just go right into it. We could also take these three colors and mix them up. I don't know. I was kind of liking this with a white to desaturate it a little bit. So we'd throw in a pearl maybe, or maybe even just that opaque white.
Danielle, just in terms of watching your clock, you're going to have to do the mix.
Let's do it. Oh, you see, this is how time goes away from me. I also really like that, but you guys won't let me do that because it's earth tone. All right, let's do it. Let's do this one. This is cute. Okay.
And just in the sidebar, someone made a great point. Of course, how much you put in the mix will affect it too.
Yeah. So like, for example, that's a really good point. If I had in this bracelet, if I had put more black, it would have completely changed the look. Or more white would have changed the look too. It would have looked like a white bracelet with those little colors as an accent, for example. So we'll go light on this so it doesn't make it too pastel to our eyes. But oh, and then the way that I make mixes, I wanted to explain that. But usually what I do is I have a little 5-gram tube. And I use that 5-gram tube as my measuring bowl. I don't have that with me, so I'm just going to eyeball it today. But you can also use like a if you have like one of those for baking scoops, that's like 2-3 tablespoons would be about what you could do there. So let's do this. And here goes there's our complementary. So now it's getting interesting. And here again, I'm softening the blow and changing the brightness of my yellow. And now we will make it a little bit pastel. Okay, so that's not quite as much as I did the others. And then the fun part. And my kids love doing this, but I don't let them because they make a huge mess. It's like on the floor, it's everywhere. Oh, but do they love it? They love it so much. Okay. Oh my God, I love this. Look at that. It looks like it very summer, very lilac-y. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll take a really good photo and I'll post it in our Facebook group so that you can see better than of this light here. But see, it's kind of. Does it need anything, guys? We've only used 4 colors. We used 5 colors, right? I tend to seem like I feel like the magic of 5, right? I have 5, but we could put in a 6th color. I don't know. We'll stick with it. But if I had a darker purple, I'd be going for that darker purple right now. Maybe.
It's well liked.
It's well liked. Should we leave it alone or should we mess with it more?
Cindy would mess with it and do a pinch of purple again.
And this one? We could level it up.
Yeah, she would do a pinch of lilac.
Okay, so it's going to be a little more. So we can't mix our paints, but we can come pretty close, right? There we go. And you can put these in a spinner. When I make mixes that I'm going to be like using for like a kit or something, I do measure each one individually. Like I'll take the little 5-gram scoop and I'll put those all together. And then that 25 grams is its mix, right? That way I know I got equal parts for all, whatever it is I'm doing. Yeah, that's more purpley. And apologies, it's so pretty on my mat. I don't know how much of that is coming over for you guys, but it's really pretty.
I agree, Danielle. It's perfect.
Yeah, we'll do that for next week. I'll have that stitched up for you. So it'll be like that. All stitched up. And then I just need to know what color thread. I want to do the frost, but we need to be able to see it. Oh, that's another reason I like earth tones is I can use thread everyone can see. But we'll definitely, maybe we'll use like a Wonder, can I get away with that? Nah, I don't know. Well,
Danielle,
definitely
I,
know
I
this
think
one.
you're in for an interesting week.
I know, right?
I want again, thank you so much for this class. I want you to know that several people have fallen in love with the color bracelet that you have there.
Thank you.
The best name for it that was in the sidebar was the Riverbed. And I
That's a
think
good one.
that might be a wonderful name. They definitely would like to know all the colors in that one. And if you could give them all the colors in the one you made today.
Oh, yes, and in this one, I'll post that in our
Yes.
Facebook group, and then the colors that are in next week's class, I think I included them already here, but let me just make sure I did. Yeah, so they're all here. So this one right here, Riverbed, we're calling it Riverbed. That one you'll be able to make right now. You can just go see all those. And then I will definitely, I'll spell this one out, and I'll even mention that we put a little extra of the opaque violet or lilac. What do we call this color? We call it, it's like a chalk purple. Yeah, so I will do a little recipe for that one, and I'll post it for you guys. Yeah. And so, yeah, I hope to see you next week for this class. And since we're a little over, I'll show you all the stuff coming up next week after next week's class. But it's already on the website. So if you go to michaels.com/classes and you take a look, classes are up through the end of July, actually. And August is right behind it. In fact, they're done already. So they're coming. They'll be there soon. All right. Any more questions for me, Carmi, or are we?
No, I think you're good, Danielle. Thank you.
All right, I'll see you guys next Friday. Have a great weekend. Lots of love to you.